everybody. If you're having problems hearing me, you need to unmute. So if you can't hear me, unmute. Alright, well, welcome back. This is Cancer Prevention Week, and this is day 5 of a week-long fast. So I am 1 hour away from completing my 5th day without food. So for those of you counting at home, that is 95 hours without food. And I've got to tell you, I'm feeling like a champ. So I feel better today than I did at the beginning of the fast, for sure. I mean, my body's kind of adapted to it. And, physically I feel great. I am hungry, pretty much hungry all the time. But it's mild discomfort. It's not hunger pain. And mentally it's getting easier. Mentally, that's probably like the biggest challenge for me in this is, my brain at some points will be like, dude, go eat a sandwich. It's like, what are you doing? You can end this hunger at any time just by opening the refrigerator. But even that, like, the mental side has gotten easier as I've gone on. And now I think, mentally I'm coping better with it now on day 5 than I was the previous 4 days. So that's pretty cool. For those of you who didn't watch my other videos, the reason I'm doing this fast is for cancer prevention. So when you fast, it starves out the cancerous cells in your body and the precancerous cells. But meanwhile, your healthy cells, they're very resilient. They are able to survive it and actually even come out stronger on the other side, where it kills off cancer cells and precancer cells and nips cancer in the bud before it starts. So great preventative measure. And what I thought I would do for you all today was look at some of the things that are printed about fasting and cancer on the internet. So I did look up some specific studies, and there are literally like thousands of studies on fasting and cancer, and some pretty interesting ones. Like there was this one where it was testing fasting and how fasting improves the ability of people to handle chemotherapy. It makes chemotherapy more effective. And so like they would take these mice, and half of them they would put on a fast, and the other half would just eat normally, and then they would inject cancer cells into them. And did they inject cancer cells? Actually, I take that back. They did do some studies on injecting cancer cells, but I think this one, they may have just did chemotherapy on them. But they did chemotherapy on these mice. And like the ones that hadn't fasted, after like 10 days, 85% of them were dead, where only like 10 or 20% of the ones who had fasted were dead. So it was showing how fasting helps make your body more resilient to fight off the toxic chemotherapy, and it also makes the chemo more effective at defeating the cancer. So pretty cool. But a lot of the studies I looked at were behind a paywall. They wanted you to pay to read the article, and I just wasn't willing to do that at this time. And a couple that weren't behind paywalls, I was looking at them, and it was, for me to read off the study would have been really, really unpleasant. It was the kind of thing where it was just really technical. So I didn't think that was going to work too well for a vlog. So what I did is I went to one of my standbys, Mark Sisson. He runs Mark's Daily Apple, and he wrote the fantastic book on paleo dieting called Primal Blueprint. And he had an article on fasting and cancer, a blog post, and had some great stuff in it. I'm going to read some snippets that I got from it. And I'm also, when this show's over, I'm going to leave some comments below it that'll leave links to this, and to just give you some ideas. So Mark Sisson's the man. I recommend you check him out, but here's what he had to say. So, according to Walter Longo, a cancer researcher from USC, normal cells go into survival mode during starvation. They display extreme resistance to stresses until the lean period ends, much like an animal in hibernation mode. Cancer cells, on the other hand, are always on. Their goal is to grow and reproduce and consume resources. For cancer cells, there is no novel survival mode to switch on. If this is the case, fasting should both improve our resistance to cancer and our body's ability to survive it, as well as surviving the treatments used against it, like chemotherapy. Skipping ahead a little bit. Figuring that since chemotherapy exerts its effects on cancer by inducing oxidative stress to all cells, not just cancerous ones, and fasting triggers survival mode in normal cells, but not cancer cells. He conducted a study on mice to determine whether fasting protected the healthy, normal cells from chemotherapy side effects while leaving the cancer cells sensitive to the treatment. Tumor-ridden mice were either fasted or fed normally for 48 hours prior to a large dose of chemotherapy. So I guess I have in here already the study I was talking about earlier. I didn't realize I had pulled this out. So this will be even better. You'll hear it verbalized in a way much better than I did earlier, since I'm now reading about it from Mark Sisson's blog. Half of the normally fed mice died from chemotherapy toxicity, while all of the fasted mice survived. Cool. Oh, that's even better than what I was saying earlier. I was misquoting it. Furthermore, fasting did not improve the survival rate of cancerous cells, meaning it only protected normal, healthy cells. Research has continued. Longo found that starvation-dependent stress protects normal cells, but not cancer cells, against the effects of chemotherapy. Longo and company found that fasting both retarded the growth of tumors while sensitizing cancer cells to the effects of chemotherapy across a wide range of tumor types. Most importantly, they concluded that fasting could potentially replace or augment certain existing chemotherapy regimens. So then he goes on in the blog post to talk about some human trials, and I'll pull some snippets out of that. There's been just one, which I'm aware of, a 2009 case study that delivered promising results. Now granted, this was written in 2012. There's a lot more studies that have come out since then, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. 10 cancer patients, 4 with breast cancer, 2 with prostate cancer, and 1 each with ovarian, lung, uterine, and esophageal cancers, underwent fasting prior to and after chemotherapy treatment. Fasting times ranged from 80 to 140 hours prior to and 5 to 56 hours after. All were effective at reducing side effects of chemotherapy. In the first case, a 51-year-old woman with breast cancer did her first round of chemotherapy in a fasted state of 140 hours. Other than dry mouth, fatigue, and hiccups, she went well enough to go to work and resume her normal daily activities after chemotherapy. For the subsequent 2 rounds of chemo, she did not fast and instead ate her normal diet, and the side effects were extremely pronounced. Severe fatigue, diarrhea, weakness, abdominal pain, nausea, and they prevented her from returning to work. For a 4th round of chemotherapy, she fasted, and the side effects were again minimized. And it wasn't just the subjective effects that improved with fasting, but also her physiological markers. Total white blood cell, absolute, I don't know how to say this, neutrophil counts, absolute neutrophil counts. Sorry, folks. And platelet counts were all highest after fasting regimens. And he goes on to talk about other effects. Improved insulin sensitivity. As I showed in last week's post on fasting and weight loss, intermittent fasting improves insulin sensitivity and reduces insulin resistance. Insulin resistance has been linked to several cancers, including prostate, breast, and pancreatic. Metabolic syndrome, which fasting seems to help prevent and reduce, is linked to cancer in general. Autophagy. This is one of my favorite things about fasting. I love this. I love autophagy. Just so cool. While autophagy, the process by which cells clean up cellular garbage, has a complex relationship with cancer, it's generally a positive process that protects cells from excessive oxidative stress. Fasting has been shown to induce profound neuronal autophagy as well as general autophagy. So if you're not familiar with what autophagy is, the body, when it's lacking in food, it will go look for things to give itself energy by cleaning up garbage like cells that are not behaving correctly, or defunct cells, or and a variety of other things in the body that are basically toxic to your body that it needs to clean up. And it will convert them into energy instead of like the blood glucose running through your veins, or the ketones if you're on a ketogenic diet. And but it doesn't ever, the body doesn't actually go into autophagy unless it's starved. Like if you're giving it a constant supply of carbohydrates and a constant supply of blood sugar, autophagy is never triggered. And most people, if you're living like just a normal life, standard people do, where like if they're hungry they go eat. If you're not fasting for, I would say probably at least 16 to 18 hours or more, it's probably never getting triggered, and most people typically don't, so they're never having autophagy. So this garbage, for lack of better words, is just accumulating in their body and it never gets cleaned out. So this is one of the ways that fasting is great for you, is that it's a natural like detox, if you will. Fasting versus calorie restriction. So calorie restriction is where you eat less, you really count your calories and ratchet it way down. And there are definitely benefits shown to calorie restriction, so that you're going to compare that though to fasting. Fasting, acute bouts of calorie restriction, is easier than CR, chronic calorie restriction, for most people. If fasting is easier than constantly counting your calories, fasting is going to work better. So, and it's also shorter. Yeah, it's just a shorter period of time. You don't have to do it all the time. So maybe you're uncomfortable for a few days, a week, where calorie restriction, you're hungry. In calorie restriction, just like fasting, you're hungry all the time. But it's all the time, because it's like perpetual. So I mean, they both are effective at longevity, but the one, you're not miserable all the time, and it's also easier. You don't have to count calories. Say another point, fasting versus calorie restriction. Fasting is more effective in a shorter amount of time, whereas studies on caloric restriction in cancer employ weeks and months. Studies on fasting in cancer employ hours and days for their fasting regimes. In most cases, fasting just seems to require less time to be effective. So, kind of what I was just saying. I should just keep reading, and rather than introducing my own little comments in the middle. I got a lot on here. And he goes on to, one of the things I noted at the bottom of his blog, so this was just little snippets I pulled out. At the bottom, he lists the whole series he did on Why Fast was the name of the series. Why Fast? Part 1 was weight loss. Part 2 was cancer, which is what I was pulling some excerpts from. Part 3, longevity. Part 4, brain health. Part 5, exercise. So I think all of those sound like really interesting topics of how fasting can improve all of those areas. I mean, some longevity, brain health, I mean, all of those sound really intriguing. So now also what I did to find some things on the internet for you is, while that was from 2012, in 2015, Dom Diagnosto, who's a cancer researcher, and he specializes in ketosis and fasting, ketogenic diets and fasting. He was on Tim Ferriss's podcast. I think it's called The Tim Ferriss Show. If you just search for Tim Ferriss, it'll come right up. 2 R's, 2 S's in Ferriss. But he was on there in 2015 and 2016, and I went and listened to those and just wrote down some little excerpts from them, because he was where he being Dom, was where I actually discovered this protocol of the 5 to 7 day fast as being something that's a great preventative measure for cancer. And very exciting is he is scheduled to come on Choice Conversations, my podcast, so I'm anxious to get him on board, and that should be really good. So he was scheduled earlier last year, 2016, but we had to cancel and reschedule, and we've actually had to cancel and reschedule twice. So once was my fault, and once was his fault. So, but he's been patient working with me, and so we're going to get him on Choice Conversations soon, and you can hear from the expert on this. So, but these are some excerpts from the 2015 interview with Tim Ferriss, which is where I first got the idea for this. So I'm just going to paraphrase, because I just jotted down notes. I didn't get like exact transcripts or anything. So he does tons of discussion about the benefits of ketosis in this interview. And I just wanted to note that you're in ketosis when you're fasting, at least if you haven't got into ketosis beforehand, after 2 or 3 days you will be, for sure. Ketosis is when your body is burning ketones rather than blood sugar, because there's no food coming in, there's no blood sugar in the running through through your veins to fuel your cells. So I believe it's your liver creates ketones, which is a source of energy, just like the blood glucose is. It's a fuel. But most cancer cells are not able to use ketones for fuel. They can only use blood sugar. So that's part of the magic behind all of this. So there's tons of discussion in this interview about the benefits of ketosis in this interview. You're in ketosis when you're fasting, but you can also get into ketosis by just cutting carbs. So I'll limit my excerpts to just the few pieces that were specifically about fasting, not just about ketogenic diets. And also the fasting protocol he recommends, as well as the benefits of fasting and cancer. So a very long interview. I think it's a 3-hour podcast. It's a long interview, but I just limited it to those couple areas. So it's funny, Tim Ferriss mentions he had a friend in a chemo group, and he said that in this chemo group, people were laid out for days after they had chemo, while his friend was able to, literally the day he got chemo, to go out and do a 10-mile run. He'd go chemo and then do a 10-mile run. And how he did that is he fasted beforehand. So kind of referencing back to that study that Mark Sisson referenced, here's some anecdotal evidence to support that from this friend of Tim Ferriss. And then he goes on, Dom goes on to talk about the supporting again what was in that other article about the minimizing the side effects of chemo, how fasting minimizes the side effects, but it also strengthens the healthy cells versus the toxic effects of chemo. So the side effects, are much less, as well as that it sensitizes tumors to the effects of chemo, so that the chemo is more effective on the cancer itself. They spend some time talking about therapeutic fasting. So fasting is a therapy. And Tim Ferriss talks about how, this is kind of funny, the recommended thing to do is what I did, which is to go on a ketogenic diet for a week beforehand and induce ketosis, because it's much easier on you before you fast. Well, Tim, he said he was doing an experiment to see, this is the plane crash scenario. Say I crash in the mountains and I have to survive fasting for 5-10 days without food, and I haven't been on a ketogenic diet ahead of time because I didn't know I was gonna crash, right? He said, well, he tried that. He said he will never do it again. He had excruciating back pain, and his uric acid levels went through the roof. He was really fatigued in days 2 and days 3, but in the latter part of day 4 and from there on, he felt fantastic. Would go for long walks, and he was very cognitively sharp. So at that point, his body had switched over to burning ketones. It took 2 or 3 days for him to do it, and by the end of day 4, and by the time it did that, he was feeling great. It's like, I'm feeling great right now. Physically, I'm perfect. There's just hunger pains to deal with, or not hunger pains, but hunger, I should say, because it's not really painful. It's mild. Tim goes on to say he was in a group of 40 people that were fasting, including some people that are fasting up to 10 days. Pretty impressive. And he said everyone reported poor sleep. So you've heard me talking a lot about my sleep. I even have more things about sleep I could say that I've been taking notes as I've been going along for possible talking points during these vlogs, right? And I have more things I could say about my sleep going. I'm not going to do it today. This is running long enough as it is, but this is apparently a common thing when you're fasting to have poor sleep. And he said as the fast went on, he felt like he needed less sleep, and so then it wasn't so bad that he wasn't getting as much sleep because he just felt like he didn't need as much. Kind of an interesting side note. And Tim went on to ask Dom what the minimum effective dose was as far as therapeutic fasting for cancer prevention. And he said basically 2 to 3 times a year for 5 to 7 days. So I should mention, and I can't believe I should have opened with this. This would be the thing I should have opened with. But I'm completing day 5 right now, so I'm actually at my goal right now, so that's pretty awesome. Day 6 is a stretch goal, day 7 is a stretch goal, so everything here is just stretch goals, but I've met the basic goal, so I'm pretty jazzed about that. So 5 to 7 days, but I'm feeling strong, so I think I'm not going to have any problems reaching those stretch goals. I'll take it day by day. If I start feeling worse, I reserve the right to pull the plug on the experiment whenever I want. But for right now, it's looking good. And Dom also mentioned that the second and third days of the fast are the worst for most people. If you can get through that, it gets much better. And I would say that was definitely the case with me. Now, I think it was around the third or fourth day that I also discovered electrolytes, which made a huge difference for me. How much of it was just getting past that second or third day, and how much of it was electrolytes, I don't know. But I did notice, literally within a half hour of drinking the electrolytes, my energy came back. So I think there was a lot of it had to do with that. But part of it might just be I'd gotten through the rough part, and it's all downhill from here. Dom also talked about increased productivity, that how much time you save. He's like, think about the time you spend on buying food, preparing food, cleaning up after food, and eliminating. Yeah, I haven't. Not only this is the 5th day of my fast, but I haven't did a number 2 in probably 5 days either. So too much information, I'm sure. Sorry. And he also said that he was very productive. He fasted while in the middle of writing grants and didn't have any problems. He had great mental clarity, and it was actually a benefit to him while he had to get these grants written to not have to eat and prepare food and all that junk. So, and he also talked about apoptosis and the good effects that fasting has, and as far as that and the cleanup that occurs. And he went on to talk about the evidence that fasting is effective on almost all varieties of cancer they found. Through the various experiments that have been out there, pretty much all of them, almost all cancer cells do not live off of ketones well. They don't handle ketones well. So, really good. And then there's another interview that Tim Ferriss did, and I'll link this as well. Well, actually, it wasn't an interview per se, but Dom was on the Tim Ferriss podcast a second time. This was in 2016, where he was answering listener questions, and really good stuff in there as well. Highly technical, though, so unless you're kind of geeked out about this, it might not be your cup of tea, but I thought it was really good. So it's like I said, very technical. Dom uses a lot of big words. If you know what every word means in that interview, I'm pretty impressed. But it's still worth your time. You'll understand the gist of it for sure. You don't have to be a doctor to understand the gist of it. So, but yeah, I'm super jazzed to get Dom on board. So that'll be nice to have him on Choice Conversations coming up, and I can talk about this fast I've done now and pick his brain about it. So, all right, well, thanks everybody for listening in again. I really appreciate your support along the way. You guys have been great. As I've mentioned a few times, I do have a podcast, Choice Conversations. So if you enjoy this and you want more, then go to choiceconversations.com and check it out. So it's a personal development podcast that is all about improving life in all the different areas. So that's not just health, but also mental health and emotional health, and improving your relationships and improving your outlook on life, and your finding meaning and purpose, being more successful financially, those sorts of things. So check it out, choiceconversations.com. All right, everybody, take care.